You're scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m., your mind racing with tomorrow's deadlines, next week's uncertainties, and next year's fears. Your heart pounds with a familiar dread that has no name, no face, no clear source. You close your eyes, desperate for sleep, but your thoughts spiral deeper into an abyss of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. In this moment of modern torment, you are experiencing something that would be utterly alien to a Roman emperor who died nearly 2,000 years ago, and yet, his words might be the only thing that can save you. Picture Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, sitting alone in his tent on the Germanic frontier. The weight of an empire rests on his shoulders. Plague ravages his territories. Barbarian tribes threaten his borders. His own son conspires against him. Death lurks in every shadow, yet in his private journal, what we now call his Meditations, he writes with a tranquility that seems to mock our modern anxiety. How is this possible? How can a man facing genuine life or death crises maintain inner peace while you lose sleep over an email you haven't sent? Here lies a contradiction that should shake you to your core. We live in the safest, most prosperous era in human history, yet anxiety disorders affect more people today than ever before. We have endless entertainment, instant communication, and solutions to problems that once destroyed civilizations. Yet we are more restless, more fearful, more psychologically fragmented than our ancestors who faced actual bears, plagues, and starvation. Ancient Stoics developed their philosophy while dodging swords and surviving sieges, yet their minds were fortresses of calm. We developed ours while dodging notifications and surviving traffic jams, yet our minds are battlegrounds of chaos. What if the very solutions we've created for external problems have become the source of our internal ones? What if our technological armor against the world has become a prison for our souls? What if the Roman emperor, writing by candlelight in a world without Wi-Fi, understood something about the human condition that our age of information has forgotten? Consider this unsettling possibility. Your anxiety isn't a mental health condition to be medicated away, it's a philosophical problem that requires a philosophical solution. It isn't a chemical imbalance to be corrected, it's a spiritual misalignment to be understood. Marcus Aurelius never had a therapist, never took an antidepressant, never attended a mindfulness retreat, yet his approach to mental suffering was so effective that his personal diary became one of history's most influential books on psychological resilience. But here's where the mystery deepens. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions or accepting defeat. It isn't about becoming an emotionless robot or a passive victim of circumstance. The Stoics were warriors, leaders, entrepreneurs. People who changed the world precisely because they had mastered their inner world. So what did they know that we don't? What secret did they possess that allowed them to face genuine catastrophes with equanimity while we crumble under imaginary pressures? The answer to this question will challenge everything you believe about anxiety, happiness, and the human condition. It will reveal why our modern approaches to mental health, despite their sophistication, often fail to provide lasting peace. It will show you that the cure for contemporary anxiety isn't found in the latest therapeutic technique or pharmaceutical breakthrough. It's hidden in the timeless wisdom of a philosophy forged in the crucible of real human struggle. Are you prepared to discover why a 2,000-year-old philosophy for modern life might be more relevant to your modern anxiety than anything produced by our age of supposed enlightenment? To understand why this ancient approach to how to cope with anxiety succeeds where modern anxiety solutions fail, you must first confront an uncomfortable truth. Your anxiety isn't really about the things you think it's about. When you lie awake worrying about your job, your relationships, your future, you're experiencing what Jung called the fundamental neurosis of our time. Not a fear of specific threats, but a terror of meaninglessness itself. Jung observed that modern humans suffer from a peculiar form of psychological displacement. Unlike our ancestors, who faced concrete dangers that demanded immediate action, we face abstract uncertainties that offer no clear response. Your caveman brain, evolved to handle saber-toothed tigers, now encounters student loans, climate change, and social media comparison, threats it cannot fight, flee from, or comprehend. The result is a constant state of hypervigilance directed at shadows, anxiety that feeds on itself because it has no real target to destroy. This creates what Frankl identified as an existential vacuum, a hollowness at the core of human experience that no amount of external success can fill. Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, noticed something profound. Those who had a sense of meaning could endure almost any suffering, while those without meaning crumbled even under minor stress. Your modern anxiety, he would argue, isn't a sign of mental illness. It's a sign of spiritual starvation in an age of material abundance. But the roots of this crisis run deeper than individual psychology. Nietzsche, writing over a century ago, predicted our current predicament with disturbing accuracy. He saw that as traditional sources of meaning, religion, community, established social roles, began to crumble under the weight of scientific materialism and industrial progress, humanity would find itself adrift in what he called the wasteland of modernity. Without the anchoring beliefs that once gave life structure and purpose, we would become what he termed the last men, comfortable, safe, but profoundly empty. Schopenhauer had identified the core mechanism of this suffering even earlier. He observed that human consciousness is cursed with what he called the will to live, an insatiable desire that can never be permanently satisfied. We suffer when we want something we don't have, and we suffer from boredom when we get what we wanted. Modern consumer culture has weaponized this insight, creating an economy built on manufacturing desires for things you didn't know you needed, ensuring that satisfaction remains always just one purchase, one achievement, one relationship away. This is why your anxiety feels so bottomless, so resistant to conventional mental health tips. You're not dealing with a simple fear. You're confronting the existential weight of being a conscious creature in an apparently meaningless universe, amplified by a culture that profits from your perpetual dissatisfaction. Sartre captured this when he wrote about the anguish of freedom, the terrifying responsibility of creating meaning in a world that offers no inherent purpose or direction. The ancient Stoics, however, faced this same existential crisis and emerged with a radically different response. They lived in a world where the gods were dying, where traditional certainties were crumbling, where political upheaval and social change created the same sense of groundlessness that characterizes our era. Yet instead of being paralyzed by this uncertainty, they developed Stoicism philosophy that transformed existential anxiety into existential strength. Marcus Aurelius understood that the problem wasn't external circumstances. It was the stories we tell ourselves about those circumstances. This timeless wisdom from Marcus Aurelius appears throughout his Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This isn't positive thinking or denial. It's a recognition of the fundamental structure of human experience. Your anxiety exists not in the world, but in the gap between how you think the world should be and how it actually is. Modern neuroscience has validated what Stoicism for anxiety intuited centuries ago. The brain doesn't respond to reality directly, but to its interpretation of reality. The same event that causes one person to feel anxious might cause another to feel excited, depending on the cognitive framework they use to process it. Your thoughts about your thoughts create your emotional reality more than any external circumstance ever could. This insight reveals why most contemporary approaches to anxiety focus on the wrong target. They try to change your external circumstances, manage your symptoms, or distract you from your worries. But the Stoics understood that lasting peace comes from changing your relationship to uncertainty itself, not by eliminating it, but by accepting it as the natural condition of human existence and finding power within that acceptance. The question that emerges from this understanding is both simple and transformative. What if your anxiety isn't a problem to be solved, but an invitation to develop a different kind of strength altogether? The deeper tragedy of modern anxiety isn't just the suffering it causes, it's the life it prevents you from living. While you're trapped in cycles of worry and rumination, anxiety is quietly reshaping your reality in ways so subtle and pervasive that you mistake its limitations for your own natural boundaries. You begin to live a smaller life, making decisions not based on what you want or value, but on what feels safe enough to attempt without triggering that familiar spiral of dread. Consider how anxiety operates as what cognitive scientists call a cognitive filter, a lens that selectively highlights threats while rendering opportunities invisible. Your brain, hijacked by ancient survival mechanisms, scans every situation for potential dangers while remaining blind to potential growth. You notice the one critical comment among 10 compliments, remember the single failure among multiple successes, and anticipate disasters that statistically almost never occur. This isn't pessimism, it's a systematic distortion of reality that keeps you imprisoned within an increasingly narrow comfort zone. This cognitive bias creates what psychologists term learned helplessness. a condition where you stop trying to change your circumstances because previous attempts to control your anxiety have failed. You begin to see yourself as inherently fragile, fundamentally flawed, or constitutionally unable to handle life's normal stresses. But here's what remains hidden. You're not learning helplessness in response to real limitations. You're learning helplessness in response to a philosophical error about the nature of control itself. The most insidious consequence is how anxiety transforms you into a stranger to yourself. Your authentic desires become buried under layers of fear-based calculation. You stop asking, "What do I really want?" and start asking, "What's the safest choice?" You stop listening to your intuition and start consulting your anxieties as if they were reliable advisors. Gradually, you lose touch with your genuine preferences, your natural rhythms, your spontaneous responses to life. The person you could have become remains forever unexplored, a ghost haunting the edges of your circumscribed existence. This psychological conditioning creates what neurologists call neural pathways of avoidance, literal grooves in your brain that make fearful responses increasingly automatic and courage increasingly foreign. Every time you avoid a challenging situation because of anxiety, you strengthen these pathways while weakening the neural networks associated with confidence and resilience. Your brain, designed to adapt to your behavior, interprets your avoidance as confirmation that the world is indeed dangerous and you are indeed incapable of handling it. But the consequences extend far beyond individual suffering. Collectively, our culture's relationship with anxiety is creating what sociologist Zygmunt Bauman called liquid modernity, a society characterized by constant uncertainty, endless options, and the absence of stable reference points. When everyone is anxious, anxiety becomes normalized. When everyone is seeking safety, risk-taking becomes pathologized. When everyone is afraid of making the wrong choice, decisive action becomes increasingly rare. This cultural shift has profound implications for human progress and flourishing. Throughout history, the greatest achievements in art, science, philosophy, and human rights have come from individuals willing to face uncertainty, endure criticism, and persist through failure. But anxiety-driven cultures tend to produce what psychologist Tim Kaiser calls materialistic value orientations, a focus on external validation, financial security, and status symbols rather than intrinsic goals like personal growth, meaningful relationships, and authentic self-expression. You can observe this in your own life. How many dreams have you abandoned not because they were impossible, but because pursuing them felt too uncertain? How many relationships have you avoided not because you weren't interested, but because rejection felt too risky? How many opportunities have you declined not because they weren't valuable, but because they required you to act before you felt completely prepared? The Stoics recognize that this is precisely where most people lose their lives, not to dramatic catastrophes, but to the slow erosion of possibility that occurs when fear becomes your primary decision-making criteria. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present, not because the future doesn't matter, but because anxiety about the future destroys your ability to act effectively in the only moment where action is actually possible." Modern neuroscience reveals why this ancient insight is so crucial. Anxiety literally shrinks the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function, creative thinking, and long-term planning, while enlarging the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. Chronic anxiety doesn't just feel limiting, it actually makes you less intelligent, less creative, and less capable of the higher-order thinking that complex life decisions require. Perhaps most tragically, anxiety convinces you that your limitations are permanent when they are actually constructed. You begin to see your fears as facts about the world rather than temporary mental events. The cage that confines you isn't made of external circumstances. It's built from thoughts you've mistaken for truths, and locked with a key that's been in your possession all along. The question that haunts this realization is inevitable. If anxiety is stealing your life one worried thought at a time, what will become possible if you learn to think like a Stoic instead? The rebellion against anxiety begins with a single, earth-shattering recognition. You are not your thoughts. This isn't New Age mysticism or therapeutic platitude. It's the foundational insight that separated the Stoics from every other philosophical school of their time. While others debated abstract principles, the Stoics developed practical mental health tips for observing the mind's operations from a position of detached awareness, treating thoughts as temporary visitors rather than permanent residents of consciousness. These Marcus Aurelius quotes demonstrate this radical shift in perspective throughout his Meditations. You have power over your mind. not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Notice he doesn't say you have power over your thoughts. He says you have power over your mind. The difference is revolutionary. Your thoughts arise automatically, conditioned by genetics, experience, and circumstance. But your relationship to those thoughts, whether you believe them, follow them, or simply observe them, remains under your conscious control. This insight explodes the fundamental assumption underlying modern anxiety, that your emotional state must be determined by your mental content. Stoicism for anxiety discovered that between the arising of a thought and your response to that thought lies a space of freedom so vast that it can contain any degree of suffering without being diminished by it. They called this space the discipline of desire, the practice of wanting what happens rather than demanding that what you want should happen. Consider how this inverts everything you've been taught about modern anxiety solutions. Instead of trying to control your circumstances, you learn to control your responses to circumstances. Instead of seeking to eliminate uncertain outcomes, you develop strength within uncertainty itself. Instead of avoiding discomfort, you use discomfort as a gymnasium for building psychological resilience. This philosophy for modern life wasn't trying to create a life without problems. It was creating a self capable of thriving regardless of what problems arose. This approach requires what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control, a ruthless sorting of all experiences into two categories: what is up to you and what is not up to you. Your thoughts are not up to you, they arise unbidden. Your circumstances are not up to you, they emerge from countless factors beyond your influence. Your health, your reputation, other people's opinions, even your own future actions. None of these fall completely within your control. But your judgments about these things, your responses to these things, your choices in this moment, these remain absolutely within your domain of influence. The psychological liberation this creates is immediate and profound. Suddenly, you're no longer responsible for controlling the uncontrollable, which means you're no longer failing when uncontrollable things don't go according to your preferences. Your anxiety, which fed on the impossible task of managing an unpredictable universe, begins to starve for lack of meaningful work to do. You discover what mindfulness and Stoicism revealed. Most of your suffering comes not from what happens to you, but from your resistance to what happens to you. But this isn't passive acceptance or resigned surrender. It's the most active stance possible toward life. When you stop wasting energy on what you cannot control, you have tremendous energy available for what you can control. When you stop being overwhelmed by the magnitude of external challenges, you can focus completely on the quality of your internal responses. The Stoics were among history's most effective leaders, entrepreneurs, and changemakers precisely because they had learned to direct their full power toward their actual sphere of influence. This timeless wisdom Marcus Aurelius proved during the Antonine Plague, which killed millions throughout the Roman Empire. Rather than becoming paralyzed by the magnitude of the catastrophe, he focused on what remained within his control: his daily decisions, his responses to crisis, his example to others. His journals from this period reveal not despair or anxiety, but a deepening commitment to virtue, service, and philosophical wisdom. He transformed external catastrophe into internal strengthening because he understood where his real power lay. This shift in focus creates what modern psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where individuals emerge from difficult experiences stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. But Stoicism philosophy went further. They developed pre-traumatic growth, the practice of using imagination to prepare psychologically for future difficulties, building strength before it was needed rather than after it was demanded. They called this practice premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Not to become pessimistic or paranoid, but to inoculate themselves against the shock that comes from believing life should be easier than it actually is. By mentally rehearsing potential losses, setbacks, and difficulties, they developed what modern trauma therapists call psychological resilience, the ability to maintain equilibrium and continue functioning even when circumstances become challenging. The revolution this represents cannot be overstated. Instead of seeing anxiety as evidence that something is wrong, you begin to see it as information about where your attachments have become rigid. Instead of treating discomfort as a problem to solve, you treat it as a signal that growth is possible. Your relationship to difficulty itself transforms from avoidance to engagement, from resistance to curiosity. What emerges from this shift is not the absence of anxiety, but the presence of something far more valuable. An unshakable confidence in your ability to handle whatever life presents, not because you can control outcomes, but because you have mastered your responses to outcomes. Here is the ultimate truth that will forever change how you see anxiety, suffering, and the human condition itself. Your anxiety has never been about the future, it has always been about your relationship to the present moment. This revelation strikes at the heart of why Stoicism for anxiety succeeds where contemporary approaches fail, and why these Marcus Aurelius quotes remain more relevant than ever in our age of perpetual distraction and manufactured urgency. Every anxious thought is fundamentally an argument with reality as it currently exists. When you worry about tomorrow's presentation, you're not actually thinking about tomorrow. You're resisting the uncertainty that exists right now. When you catastrophize about potential relationship problems, you're not actually addressing future challenges. You're refusing to accept that relationships inherently involve risk, vulnerability, and the possibility of loss. When you spiral into financial fears, you're not actually planning for economic hardship. You're rejecting the present reality that security is always temporary and life is always unpredictable. This timeless wisdom Marcus Aurelius understood with crystalline clarity: confine yourself to the present. These 4 words contain the complete cure for anxiety, though their simplicity disguises their profound revolutionary implications. The present moment is the only place where peace exists, not because the present is always pleasant, but because it is always real. Anxiety exists only in the gap between what is and what you think should be, and that gap exists only when your mind abandons the present for imaginary futures or reconstructed pasts. This insight reveals why mindfulness and Stoicism practices are more effective than those borrowed from other traditions, despite their surface similarities. Eastern mindfulness often seeks to transcend the ego or dissolve the self into universal consciousness. Stoic mindfulness seeks to strengthen the self through radical acceptance of what is actually happening right now, including your own thoughts and emotions about what is happening. You don't try to stop thinking or eliminate preferences. You observe them clearly while maintaining your freedom to choose how to respond. The deepest realization is this: anxiety is not a feeling, it is resistance to feeling. When you truly allow yourself to experience whatever emotion arises in the present moment without trying to change it, control it, or understand it, the anxiety that surrounded that emotion dissolves. What remains is pure experience without the suffering that comes from fighting against experience. Fear can exist without anxiety about fear. Sadness can exist without anxiety about sadness. Even physical pain can exist without the psychological suffering that comes from resisting physical pain. This is why Marcus Aurelius could face plague, war, political conspiracy, and personal betrayal while maintaining what he called the citadel of the self, an inner fortress built not from denial or detachment, but from complete intimacy with reality as it actually unfolds moment by moment. He didn't transcend human experience. He inhabited it so fully that external circumstances lost their power to disturb his essential equilibrium. The transformation this creates goes beyond personal psychology into the realm of what philosophers call existential awakening. You begin to see that the very structure of anxiety, the endless loop of anticipation, resistance, and mental escape, is how most people avoid being fully alive. Anxiety becomes a form of psychological time travel, a way of existing everywhere except in the one place where life actually occurs. This moment, this breath, this choice, this opportunity to respond with wisdom rather than react from conditioning. When you finally understand that anxiety is simply consciousness trying to be somewhere other than where it is, everything changes. You realize that peace was never absent, it was simply obscured by your attempts to find it elsewhere. Strength was never missing, it was simply misdirected toward controlling the uncontrollable. Wisdom was never lacking, it was simply ignored in favor of familiar patterns of worry and rumination. The ancient Stoics called this realization the view from above, the ability to see your entire life, including your current problems, from the perspective of cosmic time and universal principles. From this vantage point, anxiety reveals itself as a cosmic joke. You have been suffering about imaginary problems while ignoring the actual miracle of conscious existence itself. You have been searching for security in a universe built on change while already possessing the only security that ever truly exists: your capacity to meet whatever arises with presence, wisdom, and courage. This philosophy for modern life offers not enlightenment in the mystical sense, but enlightenment in the most practical sense. You discover that these mental health tips have been carrying the solution to anxiety within you all along, waiting not for the right circumstances, but for the right understanding. That understanding is ruthlessly simple. Stop trying to be somewhere else, and stop being completely where you are. This approach of how to cope with anxiety through Stoicism philosophy leaves you with this final recognition. Your anxiety ends not when your life becomes controllable, but when you become unshakable within its eternal uncontrollability. And in that unshakability, you find not just peace, but the power to create meaning, beauty, and value regardless of what tomorrow may bring.